This is the High-Stakes Lowdown, a RotoViz podcast brought to you by the Fantasy Football Players Championship. I'm Eric Balkman from the High-Stakes Fantasy Football Hour and the FFPC. You can follow me on Twitter at Eric Balkman and the FFPC on Twitter at FFPC. Before we get into the show, I want to remind everyone that you can get a listeners-only 10% discount to RotoViz by using the code RVRadio2022. That's RVRADIO2022. Your subscription gives you unlimited access to all of the RotoViz content and tools, and it supports the podcast channel. Now, without further ado, here's the latest edition of the RotoViz High-Stakes Lowdown. Hi, hello, and welcome to September 24th, 2024. This is the RotoViz High-Stakes Lowdown on the FFPC YouTube and Family of Podcasts Network. I am your host, Eric Balkman. You know me from the Fantasy Football Players Championship, the High-Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, and the Better Sports Network's High-Stakes Fantasy Football Show. You can connect with me on the X at Eric Balkman, EricBalkman. I want to remind everybody that just because draft season ended earlier this month does not mean that you have to stop building teams with the FFPC. Play the FFPC Weekly Challenge. You can enter for as little as $35. You can win up to $2,500. Slim and classic formats. Play with or without kickers and defenses. And only one player per team. So there's no stacking. There's a little bit of a nuance to this. And it is the same format as our world famous playoff challenge at the end of the year that the FFPC does. Check it out, myffpc.com. That's myffpc.com. Remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, comment on the video, share it with your friends and enemies, and get notified each and every time we go live. Michael Kinzel already hanging out on YouTube. What's up, dude? Thanks so much for tuning in live tonight because we have an extra special guest tonight. Extra special for many reasons. One, because this dude has won 33 high-stakes leagues in his FFPC career. Probably more, but I've never been good at math, so it's probably more than that. You follow him on the X at Overhyped Sleeper, and you listen to him when he co-hosts the Fantasy Empire High-Stakes Fantasy Football podcast over on the Player Profiler family of networks. He is the incomparable Dan Williamson. Dan, welcome in. Thank you so much for hanging out with me tonight.
What's up, Balky? That was quite an introduction there. I don't know if I can. I don't know if I can live up to that.
You always, you know, it's so humble, and I didn't bring that up. Dan is one of the most humble guys out there. He is going to live up to it tonight. We have so much to talk about because we are entering week 4 in the FFPC. We're going to talk about Zach Ertz. We're going to talk about Jackson Smith and Jigo. We're going to talk about the Bears offense and so much more. Dan, I think one of the misnomers about season-long fantasy football is that, well, you're kind of stuck with who you have, right? Whoever you drafted, that's who you got to go with. But in reality, and I think maybe even more so than ever the last couple of years, that churn at the bottom of the roster, always trying to make your roster better and as good as you can every week, that's a real thing. And you're not stuck with who you drafted. There are difference makers out there, and I think the grind is real. And those who are grinding are really putting themselves in position to win in week 4.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And this year, the grind has been more real than ever. I mean, there are teams that are just absolutely decimated by injuries.
Right.
I have one team that's just it's horrible. I mean, I've got Deebo Samuel, I've got Kupp, I've got Kittle, I've got Njoku, I've got Christian McCaffrey on this team. It my entire bench is just basically injured. So right. It's a
and the buys haven't even hit. You know, that's the other thing,
right?
Too. It's like once the injuries are injuries, right? And we say it every year. Scott Hoyt was on this show last week, and Scott said, we talk about how bad the injuries are every year, but he said this year the injuries to quality players he thought was significantly higher, which I think makes it more challenging. And obviously with all 32 teams playing every week, you can paper over some of those injuries. I told Scott last week, I had one dynasty team where I only had rostered 6 receivers on the whole team, but 4 of them were Deebo Samuel, Puka Nacua, AJ Brown, and Keenan Allen. So it put me in a bad spot last week. But somehow Cortland Sutton, Curtis Samuel, and Jalen Tolbert came through for me. And we got to win for the good guys last week. Nobody cares about your fantasy team. My fantasy team. We'll move on. Kick things off here with what an entertaining game it was last night. The Monday night doubleheader. We had the Commanders and Bengals, basically going blow for blow in the second half. Jaden Daniels with a performance against, fairly talented Bengals defense, where he didn't turn the ball over. He didn't give up the ball on third down. He didn't give up the ball on fourth down. Every time he needed to make a play, he did it with his legs. He did it with his arm. Dan, this was a guy that was going off the board as, quarterback 9, quarterback 10, when the FFPC wrapped up drafting season on the Sunday of week 1. And I wonder if it's too early to label him as a league winner, because dude has been unbelievable for 3 weeks. And oh, by the way, just threw his first passing touchdown this week too.
Right. Exactly. Well, considering I was labeling him a league winner all off season, I'm going to say, no, it's not too early. So there you have it. I've got, about 24%, 24% of Daniels on my team. So he's a big part of what I'm doing this year. I think he's, honestly, and I do a lot of dynasty too. And I had Daniels ahead of Caleb Williams. I definitely like the team situation he went to a little bit better than what Caleb got. The Bears have been just a hellhole for quarterbacks for years.
Ever.
And, so, hey, we call them like we see them here, right?
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
So, but what I like about Daniels is he's like Anthony Richardson, but he's a competent passer. Anthony Richardson is kind of starting to look like fancy Tim Tebow. But Daniels is a guy who can actually get it done through the air. And, you've got a terrible Washington defense who can't really stop anybody. They've got good skill players on offense. So you've got potential for a fantasy carnival here every single week. So I'm loving the Daniels exposure.
Were you on Daniels prior to the Commanders drafting him?
I was, yeah. Like I say, he was the quarterback I had rated the top out of this draft class. I liked him a little bit better than Caleb. I thought his chance of failing was failing outright with, pulling a Justin Fields or whatever was probably higher. But I figured for the first year or two, he was going to for sure be safe. By then I could evaluate him as a passer. And if I felt like I needed to move off him, I could.
It's only been 3 weeks. Has he exceeded your expectations of what you thought you were going to see from him in his first 3 games as a pro?
He's actually right about where I expected him to be.
Wow.
Using his legs to start with, more so, and slowly kind of settling in on the passing game. And so he's, the game has not looked too big for him. And that's always the worry, with guys coming fresh out of college and starting immediately in the pros. Is the game going to be too big for him to start with?
And he is your most owned quarterback this year, Daniels?
I think... Yeah, he is my most owned quarterback. Kirk Cousins is not far behind him, but I'm sure we'll talk about him too eventually.
We will. Yes, I definitely want to get to him because I got a lot of Falcons. I have a decent amount of Cousins. We'll talk about him in a little bit. Before we move to the Falcons, I want to finish up our Commanders discussion. Zach Ertz in his first 3 weeks, 3 catches, 28 yards, 4 catches, 62 yards, 5 catches, 38 yards. He's been getting better every single week. I think he had like 3 catches on that Commanders touchdown drive last night that ended with the McLaurin 27-yard catch. But tight end premium scoring in the FFPC, has Ertz done enough for you to say, like, look, if I got this guy on my team, I got to find a way to flex him out every week. The Commanders actually this coming week are in Arizona, which should be, I'll look up the total on that, but I would think that that's probably going to be a high scoring game. What about Ertz as a must flex in the FFPC right now?
I mean, yeah, must flex. I mean, the way the tight end position has gone, he's pretty much a must start for a lot of teams in the straight out tight end position. I'm using quite a few places as, my starting tight end and, flexing other players, but there are definitely places where I'm flexing them. And that's, it's a sad commentary on the state of the tight end position when you're getting guys who are getting, like 4 for 35, 5 for 45, whatever it was, the past couple weeks. And this is a guy we got to get into our flex. But, that's the way scoring has gone overall in the NFL this year. That's a guy that you got to get into your flex. And, he's another player I was on for the entire summer because the Commanders, they made him their first free agent signing, which is one thing you always like to see. Cliff Kingsbury goes there. First thing he does is he brings Zach Ertz along with him. Why did he bring Ertz? It's because Ertz has been a tight end one 63% of the time since he and Cliff Kingsbury joined forces. And that's with Trey McBride waiting in the wings in Arizona. They make beautiful music together. You can call him the new Jason Witten if you want.
Yes. Now there's a blast from the past, but
Yes.
not so distant past.
Catch and fall down.
Right. Catch and fall. Hey, and I'll tell you what, I don't know if he's in the Hall of Fame yet. He will be, I would think eventually. Torrey Holt made a career of catching and falling down, right? And it kept him healthy-ish for the majority of his career. There's something to be said for that. And we kind of like it for fantasy football too, because it keeps our guys on the field. Sean Green, I just posted his chat. Tight end so brutal that Ertz is a must play right now, which is not even a joke, Sean. And I don't think you're kidding. He says his Kelsey McBride start in main event is looking awful. Kelsey, Bob Harris is saying this from Football Guys the other day that he's still in on 90% of the snaps. He's still leading the Chiefs in red zone looks. Too early to put Kelsey in the coffin, right?
Yeah, I think so. The whole Chiefs offense is still a little discombobulated right now. Losing Pacheco definitely didn't help. I think somehow Kelsey is probably going to factor into not having Pacheco around just because he is a red zone weapon that they can use. So, they're trying to work Worthy in there. They lost Hollywood Brown, who they thought they were going to have. So their offense isn't exactly functioning the way they had it planned. I think Kelsey is going to have some good weeks, but, he is definitely not going to be Travis Kelsey, league winner tight end.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, weren't we saying the same thing about the Chiefs offense this time last year? Oh, they're done. They can't get it done. And then all of a sudden Kelsey came on. You had good performances from Mahomes, and obviously Pacheco will be out now, maybe the whole season. That's the other thing too. I don't have it on the show sheet here, but did anything surprise you from the Chiefs backfield Sunday night in Atlanta, the way that they structured everything out between Carson Steele, Samaje Perine, and then of course the move they made today, Kareem Hunt now on the active roster, Keontae Ingram no longer with the Chiefs?
Yeah, definitely not surprising that they put Hunt on the active roster. I mean, you don't sign a guy like that to your practice squad to just leave him sitting on the practice squad. And I was really surprised that Carson Steele, he looked better than I thought he would. I did not bid big on any of these guys because I felt like it was going to be just a real mess, and especially once Hunt gets in there, and that still may be the case. But I'll tell you what, Carson Steele, he had a 72% success rate running the ball, and that's something that we like to see. He kept the Chiefs on schedule. So I think Hunt might end up being a little bit more of a problem for Perine than he is for Steele.
Interesting. Very interesting. We'll see what happens there. But that is definitely something. I took the same approach as you, Dan. I did a lot of keep him honest bids. Carson Steele, I ended up getting in one league. Perine I already had in a bunch. So I was holding just to see what would happen there. I think I need another game of information before I start, doing anything crazy as far as starting any of these guys. Maybe not for Steele. Steele is probably a flex already. But as far as Perine and Hunt now, like you said, Hunt could be gumming up the works on third downs for the Chiefs. The team that the Chiefs played Sunday night in a really, really exciting game were the Atlanta Falcons. Now, Kirk Cousins in that game, 20 of 29, 230 yards, 1 touchdown. He also threw a pick in this game. The Falcons actually were leading in the first half. It allowed some Bijan Robinson action. But Cousins, quite frankly, did not look like he could make plays off schedule. Something that's never been a strength for his, but he was able to do it in the past. But he looked very, very statuesque in the pocket. And I think Drake London's been all right for fantasy. Kyle Pitts has been a bit of a letdown. We saw Mooney have the one big game. The state of the Falcons offense right now, I guess I want to kind of gauge your level of concern on what we've seen for the first 3 games, especially with one Kirk Cousins, a guy you ended up investing a lot in draft season.
Yeah, being from Minnesota, I've seen an awful lot of Kirk Cousins, so, I kind of knew what I was getting myself into, other than, of course, he's coming off an Achilles injury, which, you never can take that totally for granted.
Yeah.
But I'm not super concerned. With him coming off that injury, I expected a slow start. We've got a new offense there. The offensive coordinator is new to the team, so he's learning the players, what their strengths and weaknesses are, all of that. But Zach Robinson, the OC, he does come from the Shanahan-McVay tree, which is the offense that Cousins has worked in for his entire career. So you have to like that part of it. I think it just takes time for it all to come together. So I'm not too concerned about it. I did draft a lot of Cousins, but I drafted him as my quarterback too. So for the most part, he's just still sitting on my bench. Not going to lie, there's a few leagues where my quarterback one didn't work out as well as I'd hoped. I'm sure we've all been there this year some. So, there are places where a couple places where I'm starting him just because I need him. But yeah, I feel like he's going to be all right. And, as he learns his weapons and, everything, I think it's going to get better.
Pennick's not in the conversation for you for 2024, right? Like this is not a player that Cousins needs to be looking over his shoulder at.
I don't think so, unless Cousins really just can't get it together.
And you think he will eventually? It's just a matter of time.
I do, yeah. I think it's just a little bit of the Achilles and still getting comfortable with that. Getting comfortable, because every play caller calls a little bit differently, even if they're from the same system. So he's got to get used to that. He had a little bit of that even with Kevin O'Connell when he first came in. So, these are all just growing pains that we should probably expect. If all of a sudden, we're in week 7, week 8, and it's still going on, yeah, I'm going to be concerned then.
Yeah, the Falcons are at home against the Saints this week. Saints defense that looked pretty good against Philadelphia last week. Total on that game's 42. The Falcons are a 1.5 favorite. I'm sitting Cousins in all my leagues. However, I'm with you. I just need to get this guy, back firing bullets, looking good by the time my starting quarterback is on bye and I can deploy Cousins in there. That's the plan anyway, as we look at it right now. We talked Chiefs earlier, Dan. I want to get back to Xavier Worthy. Now, Xavier Worthy is a player I drafted, I think, in maybe 2 redraft leagues this year. I did get him in like a half a dozen dynasties. And my concern, and most of those were like FOMO picks because I didn't necessarily like the idea of Xavier Worthy based on how I thought the Chiefs were going to use him and based on how I thought his game would translate to the NFL. Now, I've been wrong before, but I thought he was going to be a field flipper. I thought he was going to be a lid lifter. I thought he was going to be the type of guy that is going to run wind sprints most of the game, but he'd catch those 2 or 3 balls that would make a difference. And every so often, he'd have that game where he catches 6 balls for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. I didn't like him in redraft because I didn't know exactly when those weeks would be. Week 1 was definitely one of those weeks. Weeks 2 and 3, not so much. Is there a way for you, some secret sauce that you can sprinkle on your lineups that when it's going to be a Xavier Worthy week? Because I just can't frankly figure it out.
Absolutely not. I do have a ton of Worthy. I was drafting him, I think, pretty aggressively, just because he's a player that I really did like coming out of college. I had him as my 4th best wide receiver in the class. I was thrilled with the spot he went to, and I know he's super fast, and we've kind of gotten conditioned to, well, if a super fast guy gets drafted in the 1st round, that means he's terrible.
Well, it doesn't mean he's terrible, but it does mean is
he's overdrafted.
He's overdrafted, exactly. Yeah,
right. But the thing is before we knew how fast he was, this is right about where he was expected to go. So his speed didn't really change anything, and getting him hooked up with Mahomes, I think, is a perfect situation. Rashee Rice last year, it took him until week 12 to notch his first wide receiver 1 performance. So, rookies, when they're not, these top of the line rookies like, Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Neighbors, it does take them a little bit of time. And, if you draft them and you say, this is a guy that I need to put in my starting lineup right now, you're going to have some tough times. Where I was taking Worthy, I was trying to take him as like at least my wide receiver 4, to the point where I didn't need to rely on him. Now, I have some teams with, like Kupp and Debo or AJ Brown, and, all of a sudden he's moved up a couple slots in the pecking order. But you know what? I'd rather have Worthy in my flex than some high floor, low ceiling option, because the thing is, when he hits, he's going to hit big. Mahomes has taken shots to him a couple times a game anyway. So, I think it's going to come together for him. It's going to be really, really hard to predict it, though. But I'll tell you what, he's going to be that guy that as soon as you sit him, he is going to go off for 20 points.
And the other thing to keep in mind, too, like the way you described him, Worthy might not be the guy that you're deploying out in September and October. But after Thanksgiving, December, maybe that's when the game slows down for him and he speeds up. And all of a sudden he becomes like a guy that you can't afford not to flex, or at least start as your wide receiver too, especially considering his quarterback and the way that the Chiefs always seem to be a late blooming team these last several years as well. So conversely, a player that I was high on in the drafting process last year, rookie drafting process, was Jackson Smith-Njigba. I didn't necessarily think 2024 was going to be a banner year from him. And Shane Waldron was the offensive coordinator there last year, right, Dan? Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes, you are correct.
In Seattle. Okay, all right.
Yep.
So I had limited expectations. But in Dynasty Leagues, I'm like, okay, the cream will rise to the top, as our friend Tupacker always likes to say. And I didn't think it was necessarily going to happen last year with Metcalf and Lockett. But then this year, second year, you get Grubb in, right, from Washington, who is handling the offense, and it's been a roller coaster for Smith-Njigba. Lukewarm week 1, awesome week 2, 16 targets, and then back down to 3 targets in week 3. Is this guy a little bit more volatile than I'm giving him credit for? I always thought he was going to be sort of like a medium floor player in year 2. And now I'm kind of reconsidering that a little bit with Smith-Njigba. I love the talent. I love the offense. I love a lot what's going on there. But I'm not digging the 3 targets in week 3.
Yeah, me neither. This is another player that I have a whole ton of. So I'm right there with you, Balky. Haven't been loving things so far, but you know what? I'm going to keep sticking him in my lineup. And, a couple of things I'm looking at is last week he played 47 out of 50 snaps in the 11 personnel and 9 out of 13 and 12 personnel. So his he's on the field. He's leading the wide receivers on the team in both of those personnel groupings. So he's out there as much or more than anybody else. And those rates have gone up as the season's gone along. So he's done better in week 2 and week 3 than he did in week 1, as far as like how much he's out there on the field. Now, obviously we don't want to have our fantasy players just out there doing wind sprints, which is what he's done some of the time. But another thing that I'm looking at is in week 1, they were playing Denver. Denver's the number 1 schedule adjusted defense versus wide receivers. Week 2, they played New England, the number 24 schedule adjusted defense against wide receivers. Last week, Miami, the number 5 schedule adjusted defense against wide receivers. So he's faced 2 really tough defenses and hasn't done so well. When he faced New England, he did really well. This week, he's got Detroit, was the number 28 schedule adjusted defense wide receiver.
It's a JSN week. That's what we're hearing.
JSN week. That's what I'm telling you. Keep him in there, Balky. You got to keep him in there. You got to keep playing him because you know what? He's going to reward you.
I will take that to heart. And then, by the way, that is a primetime game, Monday night, 8:15 start. Seattle and Detroit. We get a Monday night double dip again with the Titans and Dolphins at 7:30, and then Seattle and Detroit at 8:15.
Titans Dolphins. That is definitely the undercard.
Yeah, I'm just a football junkie, I guess, because I just get so excited Monday afternoon. I'm winding down my work day and I'm like, God, we got 2 games tonight. I don't care who's playing because I'm still in that mode of like, I'm so excited that there's football on Monday night and I get 2 games. That's awesome. But you're right. I mean, Will Levis and the decision-making that he's exhibited this year does not give me a lot of faith in Calvin Ridley and DeAndre Hopkins, although Hopkins was all right against the Packers this past week. But the fact that Mike McDaniel came out and said today that Skylar Thompson might not go, and we might see a third-string quarterback throwing to Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Dan, I told people last week that I'm still starting Tyreek Hill. I think Jaden Waddle becomes borderline, right, if you want to start him or not, depending upon what your flex position looked like. But this week, I think that you may have to consider Tyreek Hill as a potential bench this week if they are going with the third-string receiver. Your thoughts on that? Is that too far out of bounds? How do you feel about it?
Well, it's a tough situation for Tyreek, no doubt about it. But I'll tell you what, I've got more faith in Ty Huntley than I have in Skylar Thompson. Now,
so it's an upgrade.
It's an upgrade, I think. I think Huntley's a better passer, makes better decisions. So, I would almost look forward to that. Now, if it's the other guy who played after Skyler went out, I'm blanking on his name, but he's not very good either. So, really hoping that Ty Huntley gets up to speed, and that's who we see, because I think that'll probably help
The guy who came in for Thompson last week was former Packers, Lions, and Jets quarterback Tim Boyle, who you're right, is not good and was not good this past week. And Huntley, correct me if I'm wrong, didn't that dude go to a Pro Bowl a couple of years ago when Lamar Jackson was hurt and Huntley played a ton, or am I thinking of somebody else?
No, that's exactly who you're thinking of.
Okay, there it is. Pro Bowl quarterback for the Miami Dolphins this week. Yeah. All right. I'm on board. I'm on board for that. Okay, let's do this. The JSN we're saying is a start because of who he's going up against this week. I want to go back to another player who's been a little bit up and down so far this year, and that's been Tyler Conklin. I ended up cutting him in more than a few leagues after week 2 when I needed some help because of injuries, and I was good with it. And then he went out on Thursday Night Football, was it? And Conklin caught 5 balls for 93 yards and was the leading receiver for the Jets as far as yardage goes. Was that the real Tyler Conklin, Dan, or is he closer to what we saw in weeks 1 and 2 for people who are trying to figure out, especially in FFPC leagues, if this guy is going to be flex worthy when the bye weeks and injuries start piling up?
Well, Balky, I'm right there with you. I cut him in a couple leagues because, you know what? He just didn't do anything the first couple weeks. There wasn't much working in that offense, and he was definitely one of the things that wasn't working. Now I'm living to regret that. So, but he's still in that massive category of tight ends that I'll trust him when I need to trust him, but I don't really trust him, if that makes any sense at all.
No, totally it does. I get it.
So, we went from, just Lazard and Brees were the only things that were working in that offense to now, Wilson, Williams, Conklin, Braylon, all of them kind of got added in last week against the Patriots, and they all kind of had their roles, and they all, did reasonably well. So Conklin, he's got the skill to do it. You just have to ask, is he going to be able to get enough targets every week to be able to get it done? This week, though, I'm telling you, Balky, he's a must start. Denver is the number 1 schedule-adjusted defense against wide receivers. They've got Patrick Surtain locking down on one side, and they give up points to the tight end. I'll tell you, when Cade Otton can go like 8 for 80 or whatever it was,
right.
This is a team that can be had at the tight end position. So, yeah, I'm going to be where I still have Conklin. I'm probably putting him in, and I will be making some bids for him, I'm sure, as well.
Yeah, and I would say, the Buccaneers were playing catch-up. Certainly that won't be the case with the Jets as 7.5-point favorites. Well, we thought the Buccaneers are going to run away with that game too, and they didn't. So you never know. Break up the Broncos as they stand 1-2 on the season, and they play the Jets at 1 p.m. this Sunday. Braylon Allen I wanted to ask you about before we move off of the Jets. So you're in a bunch of leagues. I'm sure you have Breece Hall in more than a few of them. As a Hall holder of his stats, would you want to see Braylon Allen get more involved in the game, which maybe takes away from the massive spike games for Hall, but might keep him healthy and fresh as we get into November and December? How do you feel about Braylon Allen's role in this offense as he's really stepped up as a Hall owner, Dan?
Yeah, that's a fine line to walk there between, too much and not enough. We don't want to see too much. And when we were talking on the Fantasy Empire podcast earlier today, one of my co-hosts pointed out, and I think very correctly, that, Braylon Allen was being used more just because of the fact that it was a Thursday night game. So They were trying to take some of the load off. So, I'm not overly concerned about it, but I'll tell you what, it's a crime against fantasy football that Braylon Allen ended up on the Jets. Imagine if he'd been on some other team. There are so many other teams where he would look so much better. So, being stuck behind Brees, it's not a good place to be.
We keep talking here in Northeast Wisconsin about how the Packers drafted Marshawn Lloyd in the second round, and Braylon Allen, who was in our backyard here for the Badgers, went in the 4th. So yeah, there's plenty of Packers fans that are sulking a little bit about that. Packers fans are very excited about for the team for different reasons, but as we always do here in Northeast Wisconsin, we always look at the non-silver lining. We're looking at the gray cloud, and the gray cloud is Braylon Allen with Aaron Rodgers in New York right now, and Marshawn Lloyd on IR, which we'll get to in a second. I do want to focus on the NFC North here. The Chicago Bears offense, one of the most talked about offenses, really all off season, and I do mean all off season because we knew that they were getting Caleb Williams. They ended up getting Roma Dunze. They get Keenan Allen, obviously, after the Chargers move on from him. The offensive line clearly was not upgraded enough, as evidenced by the Packers ripping the Colts for whatever it was, 260 some yards in week 2. And then the Bears and DeAndre Swift, I don't know what it was like 28 for 80 or something like that. Why didn't DeAndre Swift shred that Colts rush defense? Why, when the Colts are one of the worst rushing teams in the league, is Caleb Williams throwing the ball 50 plus times? And how do you feel about this new look Bears offense 3 weeks into the season? Is it different than what you thought it was going to be during drafting season? How have they changed your perspective, if at all?
So I was concerned about the Bears offense going in just because of one Shane Waldron. And I'll apologize to his mom right now. I'm going to say some things about your boy that you might not want to hear, but he is just, I don't think he's a very good offensive coordinator at all. He goes to Seattle and Geno Smith regresses. He takes a talented tight end and Noah Fant and puts him in a 3-man committee with Colby Parkinson and Will Dissly. I mean, all those guys are talented, but he turned it into like an unusable mess for fantasy. And the offense in Seattle last year was just not ever really clicking in a lot of ways. And then he comes to the Bears and we're seeing more of the same. It's just, he doesn't have a good design of the offense to help out his quarterback. His offensive line is terrible. And he's not doing anything to help his quarterback compensate for that. So we're seeing an offense that's really, really struggling. I thought they'd be better run blocking than what they are, and they're just not very good run blocking. I mean, most of the time, Swift is getting met in the backfield. And I don't think this is really his strength anyway. I don't think Swift is a great creator. He needs blocking. Get him the ball in space, and he's great. You ask him to start trying to wiggle through creases and that, it's just not what he does the best. So it's tough to buy into that backfield right now.
Swift is a guy too that I think we consider sitting, depending upon what your flex looks like. I don't think there's any shame in doing that. That last week should have been a smash week for him, and it wasn't. It was not for him, and I think there are a lot of questions about the Bears, and I know like CJ Stroud said this after the Texans beat the Bears on Sunday night, week 2. He said, look, it took me till like week 4, week 5, my rookie year before I kind of found my rhythm. And maybe Caleb Williams finds his rhythm then. Maybe Keenan Allen will be healthy then. Maybe Roma Dunze, who's battling a sprained MCL right now, will be fully healthy by then. Cole Kmet actually had a pretty good game. That was nice to see. That was another tight end I parted ways with in a lot of leagues after week 1 and 2. So we'll see what happens with the Bears. But yeah, I do share some of the same concerns there with the Bears going forward, and definitely would encourage anybody to think twice before you are starting anybody on that Bears offense not named DJ Moore week in and week out. I want to get back to the Marshawn Lloyd discussion. He was placed on IR prior to week 2, which means he can come back as early as week 6. Like that could be the first game he's back. Now, just because he's eligible for game 6 doesn't mean he'd be playing in game 6. Just because he's eligible by game 6 doesn't mean that he would be taken off IR in time for that week 6 game. And we don't know what kind of shape he's going to be. And we don't know what kind of shape the Packers backfield is in. We do know that they paid Josh Jacobs a lot of money and they've been giving him the rock quite a bit. And we know that Emmanuel Wilson these last 2 weeks, Dan, has looked pretty good. All that considered, and you know how important it is to stack wins up in the FFPC as early as you can. How cuttable is Marshawn Lloyd in redraft formats for you right now?
In redraft, yeah, I think he's pretty cuttable. I think he might be a little bit the Tank Bigsby of 2024. Struggling to get there. And not necessarily any fault of his own. Injury has definitely been a big part of it. It seems like every time he gets on the field, he gets hurt again, and that hasn't been his history in college. So I don't think that this is something you really need to worry about. But, Wilson has definitely put him in the rearview mirror so far. And, Wilson is playing, I think, low-key great. He's a guy that, just he catches my eye when he's on the field. So I think he's definitely a good counterpunch along with Jacobs, who looks like he could be just a smash pick in the fantasy game for sure. And the thing is with Marshawn, even if you can hold him for now, once the buys start, he's going to be even tougher to hold. I guess the way I'd put it is he's going to be a guy on my speed dial. If anything happens to Jacobs, anything happens to Wilson, I want him on my team again right away. But, because this is a really productive backfield. Because you know what, you could be trying to figure out the Raiders mess. You could be trying to figure out the Bears mess, and rather than, waste picks trying to delve into that, I would rather even hold the third string back for the Packers if I can, than, try to guess what is going to happen next in those backfields.
Okay. All right. I can get on board with that. Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is because, it would take probably both even if Jacobs were to miss time, like Marshawn Lloyd, he's not going to be the man. Emmanuel Wilson's just too good. Right. It would take a Jacobs and Wilson injuries for Marshawn Lloyd to be startable in fantasy. And if you're not going to roster somebody who won't be startable in an optimal situation. The other thing too, in regards to Lloyd, he has been hurt. This is his third injury of the season. He started training camp hurt, practiced in training camp for about a week, got hurt again in preseason, and then came back and then got hurt again in week 1. I don't think he's necessarily injury prone in quotes per se, but I do think that this has the makings of a lost season, a la Tank Bigsby 2023, as you so aptly put it before. Looking back on week 3, Dan, was there anything that, we talked about some pretty big performances. Jaden Daniels, we talked about Smith and Jigba, but I think we've gotten to the bottom of why those guys were great. Daniels is just a great player, and JSN had a bad week because of the matchup. He should bounce back this week. Anything that stood out to you, good or bad, in week 3 that caught you off guard, like, whoa, I didn't see that coming? Anything like that for you?
Yeah, it was right in my own backyard too. It had to be the way that the Vikings totally dismantled the Texans on offense and defense. It was, I thought this could be an interesting Vikings team. I think it's gone way beyond that at this point. We're going to find out a lot about the Vikings in the next 3 weeks, because they've got the Packers coming up this weekend. They've got the Jets in London, a bye week, and then they've got Detroit. After those 3 games, we're going to know what the Vikings are all about. But right now, they look real good. The defense is really creating havoc. Teams can pass on them, but the sacks and the picks are keeping them from putting up the points. Darnold's playing within the system. I thought he would be the next Geno, the next Baker, before he even signed with anybody. Back in February, I was saying this on podcast. And, I should have put it on Twitter, because then I could just, do my victory laps. But,
you could pin that tweet right now, my friend. You could pin that tweet right now. You look like more of a genius than you already are.
I got a long way to go to get to genius, I'll tell you that.
Well, listen, you are further than most people, I'll tell you that. I think what's interesting about the Vikings is, and I can't remember what the stat exactly was, but they have had at least 5 sacks in their first 3 games. With Brian Flores, who I think is a really talented defensive coordinator. And I don't know, I haven't studied them really closely. I don't know how much too high stuff that they've been playing. But when you have a guy as talented as Harrison Smith and the safety play that they've been getting, God, I think that just opens you to do so much more with those other 10 guys. And I think that's what we're seeing in Green Bay this year with McKinney. Because you can do so many exotic stuff with your blitzes and your coverages when you have a big time ball hawk like that back there. And I think that kind of flies in the face of what we're seeing in the NFL right now. Touchdowns are down, passing touchdowns are down in part, I think, because of this too high safety stuff, which is keeping everything in front of you. And unless you're hyper precise like Patrick Mahomes and you can dink and dunk your way down the field and have these long sustained drives, it's difficult to score. But the playmaking defenses, man, if you have those, it's been fantastic. And oh, by the way, the Vikings too. I did not have a Darnold, Aaron Jones, Justin Jefferson trio on my bingo card in February of this year. As far as being the difference makers, getting them to 3-0 on the season. I've said for years, when Aaron Jones is healthy, he's a top 5 talent at running back in the NFL. And man, as long as that
100%.
dude's humming, keep that dude healthy, and he's going to be awesome for the Vikings. He's going to be awesome for fantasy. If that guy plays like 14, 15 games this season, now that's a true league winner right there, Dan, given where we were picking him.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I was so happy to see Aaron Jones signed by the Vikings because he's such a good fit for that offense. And, he's a great teammate. He's a great interview. I mean, you guys had him in Green Bay for years. You know what? And he's
glue of the locker room. He's a great He's a great culture guy.
I think that's exactly it. So yeah. And by the way, you mentioned Kansas City. Can I just say how great it is that we have gone full circle in Kansas City? Remember Hank Stram matriculating the ball down the field. And now that's exactly what Kansas City does again, is matriculate the ball down the field.
I think like it's, I don't want to say like throwing the ball deep has become overrated, because if you can do it, you can do it accurately, that's still a weapon. But man, if Tom Brady does, I was saying this on my local radio show today, he's done this like for the last 15 years of his career, maybe even longer. Just 10 yards, just keep the chains moving. Brett Favre said that for years. And shout out to him. I hope, horrible news today from him with the Parkinson's. And I hope, prayers go out to him and his family. But the thing is, if you can if you can keep the chains moving, then you are going to score points. I don't care what kind of defense they throw at you. Now, it may not be great for fantasy. We may not see, big fantasy points in those games, big fantasy performances. But the amount of quarterbacks that can do that in the NFL is so few and far between. That's why these the Will Levises of the world, and to a certain point, Anthony Richardson was getting a lot of hate in the chat earlier. That's why they're struggling right now, is, they can do some exciting things, but just getting simple 7-yard gains on 3rd and 5, making it 2nd and 2 instead of 2nd and 9. Like these are the things that are really helping offenses right now. The Vikings' destruction of the Texans, I'm not panicking about the Texans at all, but the Vikings are for real. And my God, Sam Darnold, this is a guy that I've seen it on X this week, Dan. People are talking about him being a top 12 quarterback, which makes him a starter in fantasy right now. I don't think that's that perplexing. I think it's doable.
Yeah, he's playing within the system. I mean, Kevin O'Connell for Coach of the Year. Honestly, that guy just puts together a great offense. We saw him with just the absolute bottom of the barrel dumpster quarterbacks at the end of last year after Cousins went down. And he was somehow making it work for the most part. I mean, the Vikings were more losing those games on defense than they were on offense a lot of the time. I mean, he sort of hit the expiration date on Dobbs. The league figured him out a little bit. And so, but then he moves on to the next guy and then moves on to the next guy. And he manages to play to the strengths of, whoever he's got. And I tell you what, when you get a coach who can take the players he's got and coach to their strengths rather than trying to fit them into a cookie cutter system, that's what you want to see.
Not that I want to offend Bears fans here, but I will say regarding the NFC North, and I saw this on X today too. Dan Campbell, Matt LaFleur, and Kevin O'Connell all win games they're supposed to lose, and Matt Eberflus seems to lose games he's supposed to win. It's just it's not great for the Bears right now. It's not great, but we'll see.
Horribly true, Eric.
Horribly true. Yeah, indeed. Permar99, one of our good buddies in the chat right now, he has a starter sit question for week 4, early starter sit question, but I think it's wild, or it's definitely worth bringing up. Ramondre Stevenson is at San Francisco this week. And then the other flex question he has is Calvin Ridley at Miami on Monday Night Football. Dan, do you have a feeling on that, which one you would rather go with? I lean towards Stevenson because the Niners defense they got so many injuries. They just lost Hargrave for the season too. I feel like Stevenson is probably the play there over Ridley, even in full PPR. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, because Stevenson is really more of a focal part of that offense. And one of the problems that really reared up in Tennessee this past week was the fact that all of a sudden their passing tree just got super diverse. They're passing to tight ends that I've got to look up. I'm like, I didn't even know he was on the Titans.
Yeah.
So, when you start hitting that, and Calvin Ridley ends up with what, 1.9 points or something like that in fantasy, that's tough because you cannot have a guy that you're putting into your flex, hopefully getting just, a couple of targets and, coming up with one reception. So I think Stevenson is probably the safer play. I'll go ahead and give the nod to Ridley with the ceiling, but I'm not sure how achievable that ceiling is. So I would just play Stevenson there.
Yeah, it's Stevenson. I mean, it's just hard for me to turn down that volume right now. So yeah, I would probably agree with that. Now, the other thing too to keep in mind, Ridley was shadowed by Jair Alexander a lot this week in week 3, which probably contributed to his performance. When you look at who the Dolphins have at corner, there's a guy named Jalen Ramsey who I believe is healthy. Now, I don't know if they're going to shadow him, but I do know that when he went up against an elite corner this past week, it wasn't great for him. And actually, Hopkins did have a pretty good game, too, against Eric Stokes. How about this one from Permar, too? Dan, this fits with a lot of your teams this year. Now, he has Trevor Lawrence as his backup quarterback, who I could not believe they have lost 8 straight Trevor Lawrence starts in Jacksonville. It just boggles my mind. He says, safe to ride my Exodia. I hope I'm Exodia. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. Quarterback Jaden Daniels and cut Trevor Lawrence as a backup. I hate to cut my backup quarterback because things happen. But right now, I don't think there's any reason to ever think about starting Lawrence over Daniels, Dan.
Yeah, shout out to Exodia being the buzzword of
Exodia
2024. So,
Got it. I didn't even know.
Yeah,
Permar's the only guy that I ever see use it. And I always read it. I don't say it out loud. So I didn't know if it was Exodia. Now I know. Exodia.
That's what I think it is. I'm pretty much in the same boat as you, Balky. I mean, we're just, poor Midwestern slobs here.
Yeah, exactly.
And we do the best we can with the big words and
whatever the people in New York and LA are saying, that's what we'll just go with. Like the smart people there.
No doubt. So anyway, yes.
Yeah.
But to get to the question itself, I mean, the vibes in Jacksonville are as bad as they've ever been. I mean, we were wondering in a couple chats that I'm in, is Doug Peterson, is he going to be the first coach to be fired this year? I mean, Jacksonville looked like they did not even want to be there on offense or on defense. Trevor Lawrence looks lost. It's a tough situation. And, I guess to answer that question, it kind of depends on how badly you think you need a backup quarterback at all. There's a lot of leagues I'm pretty comfortable riding without a backup quarterback if I've got, a guy like Daniels who I do believe in and trust. And if I'm looking at somebody like, Trevor Lawrence who's doing nothing for me right now, and I'm not even sure if I'm going to feel good about putting him in there, and Daniels' bye is until week 14. So, you got a long way to go before you even really need to worry that much, as long as Daniels stays healthy. So, yeah, I would rather roster the extra running back, wide receiver, tight end, or take a different shot at quarterback probably than Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, it's tough like right now because, you think about guys like Darnold or, Andy Dalton on the waiver wire, that you'd probably rather have than Trevor Lawrence. It's like, are you really losing anything by sending him to the waiver wire when you consider what you could gain with a backup running back or so on and so forth? Now, a guy that you could pick up off the waiver wire, and it might be too early to do that right now, but let's talk about the Laporta situation, who currently is day-to-day in Detroit with a low ankle sprain. When the Twitter doctors actually got this one right, the majority of them anyway. How high do you rank Brock Wright if Laporta is out? Asks Permar99. Now, that game this week is one we talked about already. The Detroit-Seattle game on Monday Night Football, a total of 47 in that matchup. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that Laporta is ruled out early. Okay, we know that he is not playing. Brock Wright, tight end premium format. Flex worthy for you, Dan?
I think there's a good chance he could be. It's going to be very team dependent. It's so hard to, comment. Everybody's got different teams.
Right.
But I could definitely see him being a guy that I might want to use, because I do know that Seattle's not that great against a tight end. So I think he's got a decent chance. I do expect Detroit to probably try to major on their other weapons. They've got Jamison Williams, who got a ton of targets up until last week, and then mysteriously only got a couple. They've got Amon-Ra St. Brown. They've got both their star running backs. Tim Patrick is decent. So it's tough to put a ton of faith into Brock Wright, but I guess I'd say if you're really stuck, if you really need him, hey, I'd throw him in there and say, what the heck?
Who would you rather play on Monday night? Would you rather, because I think there's three guys really to consider if you wanted to wait till the last minute to see if Laporte is active or not. You would have Jonnu Smith, who plays in the early game that night for Miami, and you'd also have Brock Wright. There'd be Noah Fant, who may or may not be out there. He's out there in some of my non-tight end premium leagues, so I think he's another guy to consider. Best case scenario for you there, if Laporte is out, who would you rather utilize, Wright, Fant, or Jonnu Smith?
I think that would probably depend on who's at quarterback for.
Let's assume Snoop Huntley is quarterback for Miami in this scenario.
Yeah. Then I might go Jonnu, just because I think he might end up being a bigger part of the offense. I think Detroit just has more ways to go. As Permar points out, Detroit does use the tight ends, but Detroit is also a team that will vary their usage depending on the situation, and so I'm a little bit concerned about that. Hey, maybe Wright goes out there and gets us 10, 14 points, something in that range for FFPC. I think that's certainly within the range of possibility, but I also wouldn't be surprised to see a 2.3 or something like that.
Right, exactly. That's the thing. Like it's like medium ceiling and low floor in that scenario too. One other question here from Michael Conzel. Is Jaden Reed the wide receiver one in Green Bay when Love returns? Here's the thing. They spread the ball around a lot there in Green Bay, regardless of who the quarterback is. And I think that Watson and Reed and Wicks and Dobbs are all great for best ball. If I had to pick one Packers receiver that I would trust on a week-to-week basis, and as Matthew Berry always says, trust is a strong word, it would be Jaden Reed. The way that they are featuring him, even when he doesn't get the ball, Dan, he's giving defenses fits with the motion and where, they're getting him the ball in the backfield, they're getting the ball over the middle, they're getting the ball to him deep. I think he is the one guy that you can trust as far as some usage every week. Might not be the usage you're looking for, but to me, that's what makes a wide receiver one. He's not a classic wide receiver one, but he's a wide receiver one for the Packers.
He's Debo. I mean,
Debo light. I'll say Diet Debo on
Debo.
him.
There you
Diet
go.
Debo, yeah.
But he's got juice, and that's what you want, when you're trying to figure out who you're going to start. If I can take a guy that's got the juice that Reed has versus somebody else, I'm probably going to go with Reed. So and really all the Green Bay wide receivers I think are pretty darn good. I think Wicks would probably be starting for a lot of teams, and instead he's splitting time with Watson.
Yeah.
Dobbs, might be the more juice free version, but the thing is, he runs good routes and Love trusts him, so what does it matter in that case?
Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah, that's the thing. And I think all four of those guys are really talented, and to see these guys grow up together, it's exciting. That said, they're gonna have to start paying Dobbs and Watson here pretty quick, and then the band might be broken up. You never know. Let's final question for you, Dan, tonight. The FFPC waiver wire will go off at 10 p.m. tomorrow night. People have already been placing bids. When you look at what happened in week 3, when you look at what people need for week 4, do you think any players are going to entice the FFPC players, maybe more so than some other players on the waiver wire this week?
I don't think there's any big targets this week, Balky. I think it's just, it's going to be a lot of people just kind of looking to address particular needs on their particular teams. Like I have some teams I'm going out there and I'm going to hunt around for a running back, but I'm not going to spend much on them. I have other teams I'm going to hunt around for a wide receiver, but I'm not going to spend much on them because I don't think there's anybody out there that's worth a ton of money. I think it's a week to kind of conserve that fab and, see what happens. But the thing you want to do is make sure you check the transaction log from the prior week's, waiver wire runs, because you know what? There have been some surprising drops in some of my leagues. So it's always good to check that and see what's going on there, because sometimes those guys that get dropped, especially if they were injured for a week or two or something like that, like a Dameon Pierce, let's say he's able to start this next week and Mixon still needs another week. He's, you're going to have to scroll down some to find him. And if you're not scrolling down that far, you might miss him. So it's a lot easier to pick up guys like that off the dropped list from the previous week transactions, and just make a point to try and see if you can add them in one of your leagues.
I think in the KFFSC, which I played in for years, I always liked for a long time. I always liked getting up Thursday morning to see who I got on the waiver wire. And now, Dan, it's become like, I want to see who got dropped. That's more exciting to me, to see who I could pick up the following week, because injuries hit everybody different. Bye weeks are going to hit everybody different. And a player that is dropped in some leagues may not be dropped in. I'll give you a perfect example. One of my KFFSC Dynasty Leagues, and Craig Campbell, who's been a guest on this show before, I don't think I'm embarrassing him here because he had some issues with his team. He did not have any IR spots left, and he was in desperate need of some depth that he could start that week. He cut Hollywood Brown after the news that he was going to go on IR and probably wouldn't be back into the postseason. So it's a lost year for him. And I am always on the lookout for players like this. I can pick him up. I could stick him on IR. So I spent $486 of my $1,000 bidding to pick up Hollywood Brown, and I got him. However, I was the only one who bid on him. So I could have got him for $1, paid $486 for him. It is what it is.
The thing is, you got to pay what you think a player is worth to your team, and then you can't look back. There's no regrets whatsoever. If he was worth $486 to you, he was worth $486, and you get a deal.
There you go.
So yeah,
and that's the way I look at it. It's all about looking forward now, my friend.
Yes.
No looking back, like you said. The waiver wire this year, have you spent a lot? Who have been some of your major purchases over the course of the first 3 weeks that you can share with us?
I haven't really made any big spends. For the most part, it's been, maybe guys in the, $70 to $100 ranges. I spent up a little bit, maybe more than I needed to, like you say with Hollywood. Yoshivas was a guy that I was picking up some early. Naylor was a guy I was picking up some early, and I just, I felt like these were guys who were going to have vital roles on their team for at least a couple 3 weeks. And if they're going to have a role on the team for a couple 3 weeks, I'm not going to spend, like $200-$300 on them, but I'll spend up to $100 or maybe even a little bit more if I think I need to get them on my team, because you know what, if they put me over, from a loss to a win even once, that's worth a lot. So I'll take it.
With Yosivas here too, Michael Kenzel points out that from that Monday night game last night, he got 7 targets, 5 catches, including a touchdown. Higgins in his first game back 6 targets. He only catches 3 balls for 39 yards. But what about Yos? I mean, this is an interesting thing because, that Chase is startable. That Higgins is startable. Do the Bengals, the 0-3 Bengals, actually have 3 startable receivers right now?
Well, I mean, they are playing from behind a lot. So.
That's true. Touche. Good point.
There you go. Honestly, the injuries on that defense have made it pretty tough on that team, I think. So we're probably going to be seeing some shootouts. And then they're getting a lot of targets to 2 of their tight ends. They've got both Gesicki and Eric Gall. Who they really like, and they're getting targets to those guys too. So you got to ask yourself, hey, T. Higgins, it was his first week back. Maybe they took it a little bit easier on him. But Yoshivas was a guy I was kind of interested in even last year when, in Dynasty, when they took him in the 3rd round, I think it was. And, so this was a player that I thought was kind of interesting, going to a kind of interesting place. So he was somebody who came to my mind really easily. When Higgins was out, I was like, okay, Yoshivas, I want to go get him.
Right. Exactly. And we'll see what happens going forward with Cincinnati.
Right.
It's a desperate team right now. And sometimes desperate teams do some pretty fun stuff. on the field.
Speaking of which, those are a couple players I wouldn't cut. I wouldn't cut you
Yeah.
through this. I would not cut Jalen Naylor, because you know what? We don't know how big a roles those guys will have moving forward, and they have shown some ability. So, don't be too quick to just, put them on the floor.
What's the inside scoop on Addison? Is he not playing this week?
I think he's going to play if he can.
Okay. All right.
So,
all right. There you go.
Kevin O'Connell seems relatively optimistic that he'll be able to go, but certainly not a sure thing.
Right. A sure thing is definitely listening to the Fantasy Empire podcast, something that got brought back by Player Profiler. It is yourself, Chris Vaccaro, Nelson Sousa, and of course, Matt Bodica on this show. And you guys record Tuesdays. The podcast usually comes out fairly quick after that, right?
Yeah, so we record on Tuesdays at 11 o'clock Eastern, and then we try to get the podcast out either on Tuesday night or sometime on Wednesday, because
Perfect.
We hope it's actionable. For people as they're going into waivers. We don't really talk about waivers per se, but we talk about a lot of teams and players. So there's stuff to be gleaned.
And I think that's the important thing that one of the things I always pride myself on with the High Stakes Fantasy Football show and hour, especially the hour, is exposing all these high stakes players like yourself, Dan, who are grinding with their own money and, trying to win 7-figure grand prizes. And that's what you've assembled with Fantasy Empire, 4 guys that are grinding, that are working hard with their own money. It's a great listen. I would encourage everybody to do that on the Player Profiler Podcast Network, as well as anywhere you get podcasts as well. And as far as your overhyped, I bring this up with you all the time, the overhyped sleeper moniker on X. It is, which letter is it missing again?
It is missing the final E from sleeper, and that is because when I first adopted this moniker, I ran out of characters, so I'm like, okay, which one can I eliminate and still get the idea across? And that was the obvious one. I didn't want to be the overhyped leper or anything like that, or the overhyped leaper. The final E had to go, and honestly, I've never even looked to see if it's possible to put it back on there, because it's just it is what it is now.
Yeah, that's in. Listen, everybody knows it. Like, you've built the brand around it. Overhyped sleeper, no E on the last, no E on the sleeper. On X, content creator for Player Profiler, podcast host for the Fantasy Empire, a aficionado of fantasy football auctions, a Baylor guy, and a mostly uncomplicated fellow, according to your X account. All great stuff there. We will continue to follow you there. We'll continue to listen to the Fantasy Empire podcast. Thank you so much for hopping aboard, Dan. I always treasure these times we get to chop it up and talk fantasy football. Good luck in all your leagues this week. Don't be a stranger. Let's do this again sometime.
Definitely. Thanks for having me, Balky. It's always fun to get on here and chop it up with you. Like you say, I mean, this hour has flown by, so
it really has.
Appreciate it. So, it's a great show you got going here. So
thank you so much. I appreciate it. And go Jaden Daniels, baby.
Yes, go Jaden Daniels. You bet.
Be good, Dan. Talk to you soon.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Balky.
That is Dan Williamson, overhyped sleeper on the X, the Fantasy Empire podcast co-host over at the Player Profiler Podcast Network. And of course, longtime FFPC player, 33-time champion. It's like I said, it's more than that, because Dan splits teams with a lot of other high stakes players. He's won a lot more than 33 to his name, but really more than that. That will complete our show this week, ladies and gentlemen. Want to thank you so much for watching. Always a blast hanging out with you on Tuesday nights, trying to answer all the questions that you have on the program. We got waivers tomorrow night. I'll just give you an update on what's going on with shows this week. Thursday night, 7 o'clock p.m. on the FFPC socials, including YouTube and the Better Sports Network. It will be Blair Andrews from RotoViz and myself at 7 p.m. Thursday night, chopping it up, taking you into that Cowboys-Giants Thursday night game. That's going to be a fun one. CeeDee Lamb, Malik Neighbors going back and forth. Can't wait for that. That'll be Thursday night. Friday night, very excited to welcome in the current leader in the Fantasy Pros Championship, joining myself and Farrell Elliott on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour from the First and 15 podcast, again, on the Player Profiler Network. Dio the Machine is going to be our guest. Very excited for that as we talk with him as he's chasing that $1 million grand prize in the Fantasy Pros Championship. If you are looking for some fun this week in fantasy football, go to myffpc.com, play the FFPC Weekly Challenge, enter for as little as $35, win up to $2,500 at myffpc.com. Play with kickers and defenses, play without kickers and defenses. It is all available at myffpc.com, the weekly challenge. Remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, comment on the video, share it with your friends, share it with your enemies. Each and every time we go live, you will get notified if you click that notification bell. Thanks so much for watching. This show will be live next Tuesday with Scott Johnson, the Week 3 leader in the FFPC main event. Can't wait to talk with him. We're just bringing you all the high-stakes grinders on these shows and answering your questions. Just love talking fantasy football with y'all. Don't be a stranger. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll talk with you again Thursday night. Thank you for listening to the High Stakes Lowdown, a RotoViz podcast brought to you by the Fantasy Football Players Championship. And thanks to Grapes for our theme music. Please review the podcast on iTunes under the RotoViz radio feed. It helps us find new listeners. Contact us via email, rotovizradio@gmail.com. We'd love to hear what you think, and follow us on Twitter at RotoVizRadio. And remember, you can always support the show by subscribing to RotoViz at a 10% discount through the NFL podcast homepage, rotoviz.com/podcast.